Hello and welcome to the WorkWise for Screen podcast, created to help our screen industries better look after all the people their businesses depend on.
And stay on safe legal ground. It's part of a growing collection of practical resources and guidance that you can dip into without it taking you forever or costing you anything. It's supported by the BFI, awarding national lottery funding.
We'll be talking with people across production, distribution and exhibition, animation, VFX and gaming about the challenges to well-being we face when deadlines and budgets are tight, and how, most importantly, to improve things. We are your hosts, Tacita Small from the Small HR Company, the HR for Entertainment one,
and Keith Arrowsmith, the legal one, a creative industries solicitor and programme director for WorkWise for Screen.
Today we're joined by Amelia Knott, the Human Rights Specialist for the TV Industry Human Rights Forum. She's written 2 reports highlighting the working conditions in the screen industry. The first was released in 2020 and drew attention to the often overlooked roles in productions such as cleaners and security staff.
And their second report, entitled Let's Fix It in Post, exposed the emotional and mental toil often faced by workers in post-production. She talks to us today about her work looking at the industry through a human rights lens and the systemic change which needs to happen to provide extra support and protections to workers.
And Amelia Knott, thank you so much for joining us. I see here, and looking at my notes, that you've done a few reports, say a few 2, with one of my favourite titles, or one of my favourite phrases, which is, let's fix it in post.
I was really pleased with that title.
Yeah, it's a really, really good one. So 2 reports. You're the lead author of the Let's Fix It in Post report, which is released this year, and the labour rights of ancillary workers in UK TV production, which was released 2020. More importantly, the report highlights and exposes the poor working conditions in post-production. Why? Could you tell me a little bit about why this came to be, or why your focus became this particular part of what we do in production?
Yeah, so I'm really interested in the way that TV is made and all the different people that might be harmed actually in the making of TV. And back in 2023, I became aware of some social media posts talking about problems in post-production. And I thought, well, this is an area I don't know very much about. And I took it to the steering group of the TV Industry Human Rights Forum, which is made up of representatives from 5 broadcasters, and said, I think this is a gap. I think there are some human rights risks in post-production, and I think it's something that we should explore. So they said, go ahead. And from there, I decided to build a research project that looked into post-production and took a human rights lens. Would it help if I explain what human rights lens is?
Yeah, I was going to say, tell me what the human rights lens is, because it's not something you'd automatically put together.
So human rights are universal. They belong to everyone in the world. They are inherent. They were initially agreed in 1948 at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And they are quite basic things. They are things like the right to life. There's a right to non-discrimination. There's a right to just and favourable conditions of work. And actually, lots of these things are already being thought about in TV production. So there will be safety teams or safety risk assessments. They are about protecting people's right to life, amongst other things. There are people working on diversity and inclusion, which is about the right to non-discrimination. So lots of these things already happen. But what the human rights lens does is to say, let's think about everyone who might be impacted. Have we thought about everyone? Because often the programs or projects that are in place, they stop, they have a boundary. They may not include third parties who are working on a production. The security guards are the responsibility of somebody else. And what I wanted to understand was how much they included people in post-production who are not on set, who often work alone and isolated. And I wanted to understand a bit more about those people and how they operate. So that's why I started on this research project.
I love it. So digging a little bit deeper there then, what do you think, or what have you noticed through research, are the human rights concerns that we don't see or didn't see before?
So interestingly, I think perhaps not with the same language, but I think a lot of the issues I found are well known within the post-production space. I found lots of issues to do with the right to health, including mental health. So, for example, people being sedentary for long periods, not able to eat healthily, not able to take exercise, not taking the right breaks and so on. So there's a physical health. And then there's also a mental health piece, which is both to do with being really tired and working long hours, bullying and harassment that goes on in the sector, and also doing things like working with traumatic or sensitive content. So someone in sound or editing or grading might have to spend hours and hours and hours working with bits of really traumatic imagery. And some people said to me, well, that's part of the job. It's also part of the job in the police, but they have guidelines and protocols about how long you can do it for without a break or without additional support. None of these I could find exist as standard within post-production. So the right to health was a really big one. The right to just and favourable conditions of work is another one. I found a lot of people working without contracts, without proper payment terms, often being asked to work for free or having their pay delayed. So a lot of things to do with what we would see as basic working conditions not available to many people working in post as well. And then things like the right to family life. There is a human right to a family life. And one of the saddest things I heard from people was that they felt, many of the people I spoke to felt that working in post made it really hard to establish and maintain relationships with family, with friends. And some of them said they felt it was totally incompatible with having children. And so some had left the industry in order to have a family, and others had resigned themselves, that it just wasn't going to be. And that I found deeply sad.
Yeah, that is very sad, thinking that the role that you've chosen or the role that you do would have that much of an impact, whereby you need to exit from that for your basic rights. So then tell me, how have you been helping productions to see the link?
So the report I wrote was aimed at broadcasters and production companies. It wasn't aimed at the post-production world. I wanted to understand more about the ecosystem and how decisions made further up the chain impact workers in post-production. And the reason I've been doing this is that there is something called the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which sets out a framework for companies to address their human rights impacts. And that is what I've been working on with the broadcasters through the TV Industry Human Rights Forum for the last 5 years. And part of that says you need to take responsibility for severe human rights impacts that happen in your supply chains. Now, post-production are a supply chain into a TV show. And I wanted to demonstrate how broadcasters can and should take more responsibility, and also big production companies as well. But look at where those opportunities were for these companies to address some of the issues that I was finding. Because we can tinker around the edges, and we can do quite a lot to alleviate some of the symptoms. And there's some fantastic work with different organisations who are there to step in and help those individuals. But I wanted to look at it from a more systemic perspective and say, well, this is what broadcasters need to understand and do differently in order to help people who are working in these situations. So since the report launched, all the members have been working through it, looking at the recommendations, thinking about their own practices. It's still quite early days because the report launched in January, so I'm not anticipating massive systemic change quite yet. But I do think it has started to change some of the conversations that are happening, and definitely increased awareness of what happens in post-production and an interest in it as well.
I was really lucky to go to the UN offices in New York last year and got a sense of that kind of value that could be placed on the guidelines, and seeing the value of it being an international standard across countries, across time. Now, it's been there since the 1940s. So do you get a feeling of why we're feeling the pressure now? Why are production companies facing these challenges today? Is it just about the budgets?
I think there's always been some challenges. I think it's only been relatively recently that the TV world at all has started to think in terms of human rights risks and so on, and that the UN guiding principles on business and human rights don't just apply to oil companies and mining companies and agriculture companies, but they do apply to every company, even those that work in creative industries who might previously have not thought that human rights had anything to do with them. So I think there's sort of been a general shift in understanding. I mean, right now, there's been so much change in the industry, both technologically. I mean, we've had all sorts of shifts from an analog to digital, and then moving to the cloud, and we've got AI coming in. So there's all sorts of technological shifts, which has been a feature actually of a lot of this post-production world for a long time. There's always been a sort of pressure to deliver high quality in quite challenging circumstances. And I've spoken to people who said, 40 years ago, you had to work incredibly long hours to deliver things. But absolutely, Keith, the budgets were higher then. People felt they could be compensated for it. They felt there was more reward. Whereas now it feels like there is people are really struggling to find work. It's very insecure. Where people do get contracts, they're usually fixed term contracts, and there's a constant worry about where the next job will be coming from. And I think all of that has a huge impact as well on people's stress levels, which comes out sometimes as bullying behaviour, but also then in terms of mental health. So there's a whole range of things that have come together. I mean, the slowdown in commissioning, the struggle that all the broadcasters are having with advertising budgets, with revenues and so on, all of that has impacts. But what I'm quite keen to demonstrate is the way that can have really severe impacts on individuals. And I don't think it is individuals that should have to ultimately bear the costs of broader industry challenges in this way.
I've got my legal hat on now. So would a production company find those human rights embedded in the kind of contracts they're dealing with broadcasters, or should they be embedding them in the contracts they're offering to their suppliers?
So they should be starting to find them in broadcaster contracts, and they should be cascading expectations, but contracts alone don't change things. That's very much a starting point to say these are the expectations. But actually then they should be thinking about, well, how might these things go wrong in what we're planning to do? How might contributors be impacted? Are we working with children, for example? And some of these will be picked up to an extent in different risk assessments. But it's sort of taking that step back, widening the lens, thinking about everyone who might be at risk, and thinking about the people who are at risk rather than the project. So we are conditioned, I think, when you work in companies and on high pressure projects, to always be thinking about the good of the project, the risk to the project, the risk to the company. And actually the human rights lens is all about risk to people. And how do we understand who has been put at risk by the way that something is being made? And a lot of that is about talking to people. And it's you mentioned that I've done some work on ancillary workers, so security guards, cleaners, drivers. These are people that other members of production crew walk past, engage with on a daily basis. And actually just having a little bit of curiosity about their working environment might flag the fact that they have no access to a toilet in their 12-hour shift, or they've been left outside in really hot weather with no water. Or, it's that sort of thing as well, is putting the human back into things rather than making it all about process.
So if we start looking at it from the point of view of a smallish production company that will have 101 things to get in line in order to deliver the project on time and on budget. Do you get a feel for what needs to be included at an early stage in order for people to feel comfortable that they are able to spot those kind of circumstances? Do you have a feeling for what helps us move this forward?
So I think a lot of it actually comes down to culture. You set the right culture from the beginning. You say, we are going to recognise everybody's contribution. If you see something or you're aware of something where you think there could be an issue, then you need to be flagging that, and we will be able to then respond and look at it. Then you have everyone as the eyes and ears. It shouldn't be the responsibility of one person to try and figure out how everybody might be affected in some way. But it should be that people are able to raise things. And it might be the content of the material that's being worked on, actually for somebody in the team, that presents an issue because they've had some sort of lived experience that causes a problem. They should feel absolutely comfortable to flag that, because also that's really useful for production to know. If that individual has an issue, maybe there will be others, or maybe there's something in the way the content is presented that they're going to need to factor in that they haven't previously thought of. So I think it's setting that culture and finding a way for people to feel comfortable to flag things. And I say this as if that's an easy thing to do, but I know in TV it's really, really hard. The precarity of people's work and the informal way that people get jobs, and this is very much in post-production as well, makes people absolutely terrified to raise issues. I mean, it's the challenge as well about being a creative industry and not wanting to stifle creativity and art, but also not putting it on such a pedestal that it comes at a cost of everything else. And getting that balance right, I think, is always going to be challenging and interesting. And I think that's where some of the best work comes, is where you've got that tension. But just as an example, in documentary making, I was told by someone that it used to be you always had a director and a separate producer, and the producer would be looking out for the operational side of things. The director would be doing all the creative stuff. And because of budget cuts and changes, increasingly you have a producer director, and one person is supposed to hold both of those roles in tension. And often the creative side of them, which is why they have come into this industry, will win out, possibly to the detriment of things elsewhere. So I think it's just about valuing the rest of the work that gets done, not just the creativity piece.
Definitely. Yeah, I think to your point around leadership and those that are in those positions of power, having picked up the big pieces of their role a while ago, how they navigate today's world with the tools that they had that were working 15, 20 years ago. How do they look at those tools to help them to work today? And I was going to ask you, are there examples that you could maybe give us of what good culture looks like and feels like real tangible things? Because some people may be working in environments and they're not sure if this is good, is this bad? And that sounds really silly, but if you don't know what you don't know, then you don't know.
So I think you need leaders who are prepared to be vulnerable and admit their own mistakes first in order to foster trust amongst others. But I've seen, people who are willing to listen, people who are active listeners, who will go and just check in on someone and then be able to sort of reflect back what they're feeling, offer support in a non-judgmental way. People who create truly inclusive cultures where no one is afraid to talk about something that might affect them because they feel that they're not going to be penalised for it. We did a project actually on inclusive security practices. So recognising that there are a lot of diverse TV crews that will have to travel to different countries, lots of different places where some aspect of their identity, perhaps their gender, their sexuality, their ethnicity, might either put them at risk or make them feel that they're going to be made to feel uncomfortable. And we did a really interesting dialogue between security teams and production people about their experiences and came up with some very practical guidance on what you can consider, how to make your security apparatus feel inclusive and make sure people don't feel targeted. And the one thing that really stood out for me, practical thing, was that within a team, everybody needs to know how to react to something that could affect any one of them. So in a team where there is one woman who might be somehow singled out, it's not just the woman that needs to know how to respond, it's everybody needs to know how to respond in a way that is not going to escalate the situation or make her feel bad. That was a really powerful thing, that sort of setting the culture at the beginning about we are a team and everybody's reactions and roles have some responsibility around this.
Amelia, it's really nice to know that there's some rigour behind the work of the forum, and thanks for sharing some of those research points and reflections that we can all work with going forward. It sounds as though there's more work to be done, but at least there is a positive way forward that we can talk through. We have some of your material linked on the WorkWise for Screen website. There'll be more of that to come, so people can be and continue to be engaged in this conversation. It might help a kind of broader sense of what we mean by things like health and safety, which I know we're going to come back to as a way of talking through some of these risks in the future too. So thank you ever so much, Amelia. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
One of the things that Amelia said immediately, and what sprung to my mind, is the fact that we can, when working, be quite insular or think about me and my immediate team. When bringing this human rights angle, it's kind of like, well, hang on a minute, who else is here? And when you start to introduce third-party suppliers like cleaning, like security, like catering, and looking at how they interact with the various stages, but especially post, how they interact with the production, you're then left with no other choice but to think outside of your own box. Do they have what I have? Does the person who starts at 8 o'clock in the evening have exactly what you had at midday when you were going to lunch or you were going for a refreshment break or whatever it may be? And so when you put that angle on it or shine that light, it can quite easily make you feel like, hang on a minute, what are we doing for others around here?
For me, there was something about that. It's the same story, but using this language of human rights that sometimes enables people to see those mistakes in a way that their other processes didn't highlight them. Because I think for lots of businesses, human rights just feels such a big subject that governments deal with. It doesn't involve our day-to-day existence. So what I think she did really well was help us understand what that means in a production context or a post-production context.
No, I agree. I agree. And, when she mentioned like fix it in post, it's such a common term, isn't it? Such a common phrase. And it's not the responsibility solely of post to get it all right. It's actually everything up front that has that bigger impact. So the shared responsibility and the language of human rights should help people to stop and check when making a decision on who you're signing on, what contracts you're signing on, who you're working with, who you're using, and not shirking the responsibility to post or to the third party. They'll deal with that. They may not know what isn't available. They may be new to this world, or you may not have worked with them before. So just checking in to ensure that they get that human rights angle, that they get, this is how we treat people on this production. This is what we expect. We're kind, we're empathetic, we care what you're doing at 11 o'clock at night, even if there's not a lot of people around, and that matters to us.
Yeah, fixing it in post needs to be the exception when there is a true emergency that we're trying to look at, rather than the default answer to anything that's happening on a day-to-day basis. And we need to make sure that the fixers are properly supported too. Thanks for listening to the WorkWise for Screen podcast. supported by the BFI awarding National Lottery funding.
Our online platform provides lots of easy to understand information and invites to our events. Visit our website at workwiseforscreen.org.uk and register for the latest updates.
Please follow us on social media and join in this crucial conversation.
And contact us with suggestions for future episodes or if you can support the programme in any other way.